BA second sem option students. Today I want to um, give you one video pertaining to your chapter number 2 of the unit 1, that is telling tales. So telling tales, it is the continuation of the concept of narrative and narratives in the stories. So here A.K.Ramanujan talked about the stories and how the narratives that takes place in these stories. So he says in the at the initial about the tales in the childhood, and he discusses about the type and the way how the narrative has continued, and then he comes to analyze, and he comes to say about the women oral tales, how these tales are women centered tales, and how the tales have the narratives. And after that we have the title, they are the stories about stories. So in this way, he has analyzed here different types of narratives and the attitude of the storytellers. And he also made the comparison between the tales told by the grandmothers, aunts, and the cook in the kitchen. And he also says about the stories in Tamil and Kannada, Sanskrit, and English. So he says English stories are not like Kannada stories or Tamil stories. And while talking about, so I come to the same point here. So A.K. Ramanujan, as a child, he heard the stories from his grandmother and his aunt and the cook. So those stories, he says, not only that I hear, but many of the children like me, they heard these stories when they are the children. And he says, being the anglicized Hindu families or in large cities like Bombay and Calcutta, so oral tales are only the grandmother away. So today there are no such background, because all the families are nucleus families today. So everything has been um, gone away. That kind of tradition gone away. Today 90% of the TV has accumulated the space of storytelling. These and more uh, views shared by A.K. Ramanujan, a very popular poet, and who is also known as the great translator of vachanas of Basaveshwara and other poems. And he says tales in the childhood. So only fairy tales we read in our early years were. So he says in the earlier age, when he was a boy, he used to hear the stories of Grimm and Andersons. They were in English. So in those books, in the encyclopedia called the Book of Knowledge, where he heard the English stories. And other than these English stories, he also heard some stories in Tamil and Kannada also. And oral tales are told by grandmother, aunt, cook, and never by my mother, he says, because mother had taken her position. She had not said any stories to A.K. Ramanujan. So whenever she came to say stories, the authority already had gone. That's what he says. So my mother told me folk tales only when she had lost her authority over me. So almost he had grown up at that time, and that was in the 20s when A.K. Ramanujan reached 20 years. This was shared by him, and they were told in the dusk while we were eating. So that's why they are the South Indian stories tend to be mealtime rather than bedtime stories. uh, so associated with relaxed loving figures with sleep and food, as the tales were formative influences and hypnotic. So these children used to keep their eyes open. By that time, we came to the end of the story and the meal. So both they meet the end together, the story and the meal. And the prince was married. So stories are like this, told like this: the prince are married, the slandered bride reinstated, and the wicked stepmother thrown into the lime kiln, just when the morsel in the sleepy hand was the very last one. And the tales in the English books usually had the names like Cinderella and Snow White, Hansel and Gretel. But grandmothers had no names at all. In while telling the tales by grandmother, they have no such names, but they have no characters like that. But usually the stories told by grandmother starts like this: a poor, once upon a time, a poor Brahmin had his scold of a wife, two sisters. So one kind and another one is unkind, who were daughters born to a dog that lived under the palace balcony, are clever daughters in who terrorized even goddess with their farts. So outwitted their cruel but stupid mothers-in-law. So this is how the story is told by grandmother, and this is how grandmother used to say the stories. And usually the literate father used to tell him only about the astronomy and philosophy rather than, I mean, Euclid and some words in Sanskrit, Bhagavad Gita and poetry. That's all. So he happened to be reading. As he grew up, Sanskrit and English were father tongues. So he said like this: so Sanskrit and English, he said, they were father tongues, and Kannada and Tamil were the mother tongues. He said, this is all how he happened to say, and how he had enjoyed, and that's all he covers in this. And I would like to cover the remaining the next video.